My name is Vivian, and I am 27 years old. I never imagined that my story would unfold in such an unexpected way, starting with that chance encounter at the pastry shop on the western side of town. It was the 5th year since I had severed all contact with my parents when we unexpectedly ran into each other at the confectionery shop in the Western District. My mother, Charlotte, had come specifically to buy lotus cakes for my younger sister, while I, Vivian, happened to be the proprietor of that very establishment. Our eyes met across the counter, and we both froze in recognition. After a moment of mutual staring, I was the first to nod in acknowledgement. She gazed at the coarse cloth apron tied around my waist, her eyes beginning to glisten with unshed tears. She asked me how I had come to be in the business of making lotus cakes. I simply told her it was because I enjoyed it. I then carefully wrapped the pastries and handed the package to her. She accepted the oil paper bundle but seemed reluctant to leave. Outside, snow fell silently. I assumed she was waiting for the snowfall to cease, but then I heard her voice trembling softly. "Vivian, do you still harbor resentment toward your mother?" I raised my eyes to meet her tear-filled gaze and offered only a gentle smile, choosing not to answer. How could I not feel resentment? Yet 5 years had passed in the blink of an eye, and even the deepest wounds had formed their scars. I was no longer that little girl who desperately yearned for maternal love. Her lips moved slightly, as if she wished to ask something more. However, at that moment, other customers entered the shop. Charlotte, seeing the situation, swallowed her words and quietly stepped aside. The customer was a regular patron who selected several varieties of pastries. "Proprietress," he said warmly, "your craftsmanship is truly exceptional. The flavor of these confections rivals even the renowned establishments in the capital." "You're too kind," I replied, efficiently packaging his selections while maintaining my composed demeanor. The customer glanced around my small shop with some puzzlement. "With such skill as yours, why don't you open a larger establishment? It seems a waste to confine yourself to such modest quarters." I merely smiled without responding. The customer, understanding the boundaries of propriety, refrained from further inquiry. After paying, he departed with his pastries. Charlotte remained in her corner throughout, her gaze fixed upon me, several times appearing as though she wished to speak but stopping herself. The shop continued to see a steady stream of customers, wave after wave, and she never found the opportunity to voice whatever was on her mind. She said nothing, and I treated her presence as inconsequential, focusing my attention entirely on serving my customers. This continued until the door curtain stirred again, and Edmund entered, bringing the winter chill with him. He called out familiarly, "My dear, have you finished with the pastries? Anastasia has been waiting in the carriage for quite some time. With the roads so treacherous in this snow, I was concerned about you." His words died in his throat as his eyes met mine, and he stood frozen in place. "Vivian? Vivian," he stammered. "How do you come to be here?" Charlotte frowned and shot him a sharp look. Edmund's expression grew complex, and he hurried outside to intercept Anastasia, who was apparently preparing to alight from the carriage. Before departing, Charlotte turned to me with a look of guilt. "You understand that Anastasia's constitution is delicate and cannot withstand shock. Once I have calmed her, I shall return to take you home." She left me with these words before turning and hastily exiting the shop. I paid little mind to her statement, having heard such empty promises for more than a decade. Through the swaying door curtain, I watched Edmund and Charlotte flanking Anastasia as they helped her into the carriage, tenderly adjusting her cloak before climbing in themselves. I returned my attention to arranging the freshly baked pastries in neat rows. The next morning, I awoke at dawn. It was Alexander's Memorial Day, Alexander being the only person in this world who had ever truly cared for me. I made a special trip to the market to purchase various items. Though they might not have been traditional offerings, he had been fond of such things in life. I believed that memorial services should honor the wishes of the departed, and it seemed right to follow his preferences. At the cemetery, I carefully arranged the pastries before his gravestone and spoke to him in quiet murmurs, as had become my custom. I told him about how the shop's business was flourishing, how the new osmanthus cakes were popular with the neighborhood folks, how Grandma Lee's little grandson had come to buy pastries and was utterly adorable, and how this winter, though cold, was made bearable by ample fuel for the brazier, so the nights weren't difficult to endure. Gradually, my voice grew softer. The mountain wind swept through my hair as I gently traced the deeply carved name on the stone tablet, as if I could see him again. "Alex," I whispered softly, the corners of my mouth lifting in the faintest of smiles. "You see, I've been very obedient to your words, working hard to live well. Now I'm living very well, truly very well." I had become simply the proprietress of that pastry shop on the corner of the Southern District, living a simple and grounded existence. I was no longer the pitiful creature who would lie awake all night from a single word of praise, desperately seeking my parents' favor. I was no longer the foolish girl who would act so extreme and nearly mad just to win a morsel of attention. And most certainly, I was no longer the stain they felt compelled to personally deliver to prison to erase from their lives. Actually, when I was small, Edmund and Charlotte had loved me dearly. I had suffered from poor circulation and a damaged heart meridian since birth. Many ordinary pleasures were forbidden to me. The kingdom's royal physicians said this was due to constitutional deficiency and would require lifelong care. Yet whenever I showed even the slightest interest in something, they would move heaven and earth to fulfill my wishes. When I was 3 and wanted to build a snowman but couldn't bear the cold, Edmund personally carved one from sandalwood while Charlotte spread smooth brocade in the heated pavilion, allowing me to play contentedly in the warmth. At 5, when I became fascinated with fireflies but couldn't tolerate the night dew, Edmund had people capture jarfuls of the insects while Charlotte covered them with fine gauze and placed them by my pillow, fulfilling my desire. As I grew older and yearned for the elegance of floating cups along winding streams, they redirected hot spring water to create meandering channels in the heated pavilion, substituting warm pastries and honey for cold wine, allowing me to participate safely. They always said, "If Vivian likes it, we'll find a way." Even after my sister was born and they had to divide their attention to care for her, Edmund and Charlotte's affection for me never diminished. When Anastasia was first born, she was too young and required constant supervision. Though Edmund and Charlotte had to split their focus, they never forgot about me. Every night, after coaxing my sister to sleep, Charlotte would tiptoe to my bedside to tuck in my blankets and lull me to sleep. When Edmund returned from court, he would always visit my study first to check on my lessons before looking in on my sister. Knowing they were working hard, I became exceptionally well behaved. When my sister began attending the family school, I waited for her outside every day, taking her small hand as we returned home together. Any candied fruits bestowed by the palace, I would save half wrapped in my handkerchief to bring home for my sister to taste. As Anastasia grew, Edmund and Charlotte managed the household with increasing fairness. New seasonal clothing was always made from identical fabrics, writing materials came in matching sets, and all aspects of our care were treated equally. Those years, our courtyard was filled with laughter and joy. I thought such happiness would last forever, until Anastasia turned 5. She began her formal education under Master Theodore, who praised her exceptional intelligence, saying she possessed the same natural gifts that Edmund and Charlotte had shown in their youth. Charlotte came from a scholarly family and had been renowned as a talented woman before marriage. Edmund was a self-made scholar who had risen from humble origins to become the top graduate, possessing extraordinary literary gifts. When they recognized Anastasia's potential, they couldn't help but favor her. My frail, bedridden constitution gradually transformed from a treasured jewel requiring careful protection into an embarrassing blemish that couldn't be displayed in polite company. I keenly sensed their growing preference for my sister and began to feel anxious, which led to tantrums. Initially, Charlotte would still patiently gather me into her embrace and explain gently, "Vivian, dear, your parents are investing extra effort in your sister's education so she can develop her talents early. With your poor health, when we grow old, you'll need your sister's care. The more capable she becomes, the better she'll be able to protect you throughout your life. Rest assured, your parents love you and your sister equally." But later, things changed. When Anastasia wanted to go horseback riding in the countryside, they insisted we both mount horses. I lasted barely a moment on horseback before my face turned deathly pale and I vomited acidic water everywhere. When Anastasia wished to visit the night market, they took both of us, hand in hand. I couldn't breathe in the crushing crowds and fainted on the cold stone pavement. When Anastasia wanted to admire snow in the western mountains, they bundled us equally thick and we traveled together. I caught a severe cold upon our return and spent an entire month coughing in bed. It appeared to be equal treatment, but these were all things Anastasia enjoyed, activities that completely disregarded my physical limitations. Such fairness was utterly ridiculous. Sometimes I wondered if I could excel academically, would they truly give me the same attention as my sister? So I applied myself to studying even more diligently than before, burning the midnight oil over books and scrolls. But my mind seemed naturally slow, and my body couldn't sustain long periods of study. After sitting at my desk for even a brief time, I would become dizzy and disoriented. The ink and text would blur together before my eyes. No matter how hard I tried, I could never match my sister's remarkable daily progress. Given this stark contrast, Edmund and Charlotte increasingly favored Anastasia. If it had been merely Edmund and Charlotte's partiality, I might have found the strength to endure it. What truly broke my heart was the sister I had protected since childhood. That year during the Lantern Festival, she was 7 and I was 12. I held her hand as we toured the lamp market, but she yanked away and deliberately plunged into the dense crowd. I frantically called her name, desperately pushing through the masses to find her. Due to my condition, I couldn't walk far without gasping for breath and ultimately failed to catch up with her. I had no choice but to run home and tell them, between broken sobs, how my sister had gotten lost. Before I could finish speaking, Charlotte struck me across the face. I was completely stunned. Perhaps my mind was too simple to understand why. Then I heard Edmund say, "How could you harbor such malicious thoughts? Deliberately losing Anastasia. Did you want her to be kidnapped to satisfy yourself?" I trembled all over, looking up in panic to meet Charlotte's icy stare. "Vivian, I thought you were merely willful. I never imagined your heart could be so vicious." "It's not true. Mother, it's not." I covered my face as tears streamed down. "How could I ever?" "How could you not?" Edmund thundered. "You've thrown tantrums whenever we've shown Anastasia extra care. Today's incident, what explanation could there be other than your deliberate malice?" They looked at me as if I were their enemy, immediately reporting to the authorities to organize a search. When they found my sister, she sobbed and said, "Father, Mother, Anastasia was frightened. Sister, deliberately let go of my hand. I felt as though lightning had struck me. I rushed over and grabbed her arm. Anastasia! What nonsense are you spouting? Look at me. How can you falsely accuse me with such barefaced lies? My extreme anger and sense of injustice made me lose all reason, and I struck her arm. How dare you? Edmund exploded in fury, yanking me away with such force that I fell to the ground. He looked at the faint red mark on my sister's arm with heartbreak and rage in his eyes. Even now, you show no remorse and dare to commit violence before our very eyes. Charlotte pulled my sister protectively behind her, looking at me with eyes full of disappointment and disgust. Vivian, you have deeply disappointed us. She then ordered the servants, take her to the back mountain. Let her also taste what it feels like to be abandoned. No one is to retrieve her without my explicit command. As the servants dragged me away, I saw Anastasia flash me a triumphant smile. That night in the mountains, the bitter wind cut like knives. My old ailments flared up. My chest felt crushed by enormous stones, and I coughed so violently it seemed to tear my soul apart. Cold sweat soaked my thin garments, freezing into an icy shell against my skin. In my delirium, I thought I might die there. When I regained consciousness, I had been rescued by a mountain woodcutter and returned home, having barely clung to life. From that point forward, I became invisible in the household. Edmund and Charlotte poured all their energy into my sister, and she lived up to their expectations, winning poetry competitions, gaining fame for her paintings and calligraphy, becoming a celebrated, talented woman known throughout the city. When outsiders mentioned our family, they would only praise that brilliantly gifted younger daughter as if I had never existed. Later, when Anastasia came of age, Edmund and Charlotte sent out numerous invitations and made great fanfare in selecting a husband for her. They ultimately settled on Lord Sebastian, a young man from a prominent family where his father served as vice minister. On her wedding day, the bridal procession stretched for 10 li, and the entire city celebrated. Meanwhile, I had long passed marriageable age, yet no one cared. My heart condition would flare periodically, my cough grew increasingly severe, but they remained deaf to my suffering. In that house, I existed like a transparent shadow, unnoticed, unspoken to. Only Alexander, the woodcutter who had rescued me, would quietly exchange a few words with me when he delivered firewood. I knew his parents had died, and poverty had forced him to abandon his studies, making his living by cutting wood, despite his young age. He knew I was unloved and plagued by illness, so he would often use his meager earnings to bring me a sweet cake or a wooden hairpin, smiling warmly as he said, "Other young ladies have these things, so Miss Vivian should have them too." 1 year passed, then 2. Gradually, we developed feelings for each other. He was honest and hardworking, eventually starting a small business that gradually improved our circumstances. The gifts he brought me became more frequent and varied. He once held my hands, his gaze resolute. "Vivian, please wait a little longer. When I've earned more money, I'll come to formally request your hand in marriage, and never again will you suffer the slightest grievance." I looked forward wholeheartedly to our simple, shared future, never expecting that Edmund and Charlotte would discover our feelings for each other. A clandestine romance was considered a tremendous disgrace for a noble family. Surprisingly, they didn't reproach me. Instead, they showed Alexander considerable favor and even consented to our marriage, preparing quite respectable dowry for me. At the time, I naively believed that blood ties could never truly be severed, and that Edmund and Charlotte still cared for me as their daughter. Right up until our wedding day, with festive music filling the air and guests crowding our home, suddenly, government officials burst in. Before the assembled crowd, they searched Alexander's betrothal gifts and discovered clearly marked official silver, the very disaster relief funds that had been stolen from the court treasury. As the hall erupted in shock, Edmund stepped forward and righteously declared, "These are the disaster relief funds my son-in-law temporarily stored in our residence, which this scoundrel Alexander has stolen. This has caused countless disaster victims to starve, and his heart deserves death." Charlotte stood beside him, covering her face in apparent anguish and echoing his words. Alexander and I were immediately shackled. I struggled desperately, screaming our innocence. "This is a frame-up. Father, Mother, why are you saying these things?" Later, they visited me in prison. Through the bars, Charlotte's voice was terrifyingly calm. "Vivian, Anastasia's in-laws absolutely cannot be implicated in this case. The family's honor and disgrace rest upon them. Be obedient and place all blame on Alexander. Your parents promise you'll serve a few years at most. You absolutely won't die. When you're released, we'll bring you home and let you live comfortably as our eldest daughter, caring for you for life." Only then did I realize this had all been their conspiracy. A conspiracy to protect Anastasia. I gripped the icy bars until my nails nearly broke. Using my husband's life and mine to secure your bright future? Are you even human? But my rage and protests of innocence fell on deaf ears. Those with eyes to see knew we were being framed, but no one cared. They only wanted scapegoats. Seeing my stubborn resistance, Edmund and Charlotte publicly submitted a memorial describing my unfilial and disobedient nature associating with criminals. They claimed they were severing all ties with me and righteously requested the court impose the harshest punishment. This action earned them widespread praise from the court. The last time I saw Alexander, he wore heavy shackles but smiled tenderly at me. He said, "Vivian, don't cry. Confessing is my willing choice. I only want you to live well. Don't think of revenge, and don't grieve for these people anymore. Promise me, leave this place, go far away, and for yourself, for me, live a good life." He ultimately accepted all responsibility and was led to the executioner's block. I was sentenced to 3 years' imprisonment. During this time, Edmund and Charlotte attempted to visit me, but I refused to see them. Later, when my sentence was complete, I took his ashes and left the capital. In Alexander's hometown, I opened a small pastry shop. Life was difficult, sustained by memories, but I was fulfilling my final promise to him, working hard to stay alive, living until I could find a way to avenge him, living to personally witness those who killed him descend into hell. My thoughts emerged from these heavy memories as mountain wind swept by, carrying a chill. I smiled once more at the gravestone and said softly, "Alex, I'm leaving now. I'll come see you again next time." Picking up the empty bamboo basket, I turned and began limping down the mountain along the familiar path. But after only a few steps, I felt an inexplicable palpitation and was compelled to look back. There, under the old tree at the cemetery entrance, Edmund and Charlotte had been standing for who knows how long, watching me with tears in their eyes. "Vivian!" Edmund and Charlotte saw that I had noticed them and called out. I stopped walking and looked at them with calm eyes. Mountain wind swirled dry leaves between us. "Vivian!" Charlotte called again, her voice thick with emotion. They approached quickly, but froze when they saw the gravestone behind me. Edmund frowned deeply, his voice carrying barely concealed disgust. "A mere woodcutter. Is he worthy of your annual memorial visits? Vivian, come home with your parents. Father will arrange a better match for you." I looked at them quietly, suddenly feeling that even explanations were pointless. Once I would have argued passionately over such comments, repeatedly defending Alexander's character. But now, these words felt weightless, unable to penetrate my heart. because I was no longer that little girl desperately seeking their attention. "Please, move aside. I need to go down the mountain," I said quietly, my voice carrying no emotion. Edmund seemed taken aback, apparently not expecting such a reaction from me, but knowing they were in the wrong, they didn't dare mention Alexander again. The three of us walked silently down the mountain. The post-snow paths were somewhat slippery, so I walked carefully, and they matched my slower pace. Charlotte secretly observed me, finally unable to restrain herself. "Vivian, your health? Is it still well? Those 3 years in prison, every time Mother thought of you." "Quite well," I interrupted, my voice soft but clear enough. I knew what they wanted to ask. When they had visited me in prison, I had just received punishment and was curled in a bloody heap on straw. Such injuries would leave lasting damage in anyone, much less someone with my already poor constitution. Indeed, the first winter after my release had been particularly difficult. During rainy weather, old wounds would ache dully, and I would cough through entire sleepless nights. But gradually, these pains became like scars on the heart. They formed scabs, peeled away, and finally left only faint traces. "Your shop appears quite tidy." Edmund attempted to change the subject. "But why such hard labor? Come home. Surely your parents won't mistreat you." I didn't respond, focusing only on the path beneath my feet. They seemed to sense my detachment and swallowed their subsequent expressions of concern, continuing in silence. When we reached the shop, dusk was approaching. Sunset tinged the snow-covered ground pale gold, and my small shop looked especially peaceful in the twilight. "Vivian, come home with your parents," Charlotte spoke again, her eyes filled with hope. I shook my head, my gaze sweeping over their fine clothing before I said softly, "Sir, madam, you should return home. Your daughter is waiting for you." Edmund's face instantly went ashen. I continued, "Now you have achieved your heart's desire. A brilliantly talented daughter and prestigious in-laws. You should be happy. Why seek out a stain like me?" Charlotte's tears fell suddenly. "Vivian, don't speak that way. What happened years ago? Your parents had no choice." "No choice?" They had simply favored Anastasia more, finding her more useful, so they abandoned me. I looked into their tear-filled eyes, suddenly remembering many years ago, also on a snowy twilight like this, when I had pressed against the window waiting for their return, waiting until candles burned out, waiting until the moon rose high. But now that heart capable of waiting had long since died. "The snow is getting heavier. Be careful on the road," I said, pushing open the shop door as warm, fragrant air rushed out. The instant the door closed, I heard Charlotte's suppressed sobbing and Edmund's heavy sighing. I also heard them say, "Vivian, your parents regret everything." But I didn't turn back. Outside the window, their figures stood in the snow for a long time before finally departing together. However, from that day forward, rather than disappearing from my life, they came even more frequently. Initially, it was every 3 to 5 days, then eventually almost daily visits to my small pastry shop. They shed their silk and brocade garments, donning common cotton clothes. They learned to behave like ordinary townspeople, arriving early at my shop to help remove door panels, clean counters, and even clumsily attempt to knead dough and tend the fire. It seemed as if overnight they had transformed back into the loving parents of my memories, or rather, they were desperately trying to perform that role. Regular customers often joked, "Proprietress, you're truly blessed. At your age, your parents still worry about you so much, coming daily to help. They truly hold you like precious jade, afraid you might break and keep you like treasure, afraid you might melt." Whenever I heard such comments, my throat felt constricted. I wanted to explain that it wasn't like that we were separated by 5 years of complete silence, by Alexander's life, by those 3 years of cold imprisonment. But before I could speak, Charlotte would quickly interject with a tone that was half pleasing, half forced, natural. Yes, our Vivian has been understanding and filial since childhood, though her constitution has always been delicate. We parents can't help with much else, so we just lend a hand here and make sure she doesn't overwork herself. Only then can we feel at ease. Edmund would nod in agreement, his gaze falling tenderly upon me, truly resembling a caring father worried about his daughter's well-being. They seemed to particularly enjoy moments when people mistook us for a harmonious family. I observed coldly, finding it absurd and tragic. This facade of domestic bliss was like a thin coating of sugar, concealing the rotten, bitter truth within. I had tried to drive them away many times, my tone progressing from initial coldness to later impatience, even carrying sharp edges. I said I didn't need help here, that their presence was actually disruptive, that I asked the sir and madam to please stop disturbing my peace. But they acted as if deaf, or perhaps they were determined to ignore my rejection. After being coldly rebuffed one day, they would still appear punctually outside the shop the next morning. They would bring foods I had once enjoyed, wearing carefully cautious smiles, as if the previous evening had never occurred. They seemed to have nothing else to occupy their time, pouring all their energy into my small shop. Edmund would insist on carrying the heaviest flour sacks, though his frame was no longer as upright as in years past, and his movements appeared labored. Charlotte would meticulously clean every corner, not overlooking even window frame crevices, approaching the task as seriously as if this weren't a street corner pastry shop, but their former magnificent residence. Eventually, I grew too weary to keep driving them away, not from softening, but from profound exhaustion. Just as you cannot wake someone pretending to sleep, you cannot drive away parents determined to make amends. I let them be, treating them as two silent but diligent assistants while I focused on my own work, kneading dough, preparing fillings, tending the fire, keeping accounts, rarely conversing with them. After the day's bustle subsided, the shop would become exceptionally quiet in the evenings. During these times, they would begin to speak haltingly about the past 5 years, particularly the 3 years following our severed relationship. The first year, after successfully shifting all blame onto Alexander and me, they had indeed felt relief for a time. It seemed they had finally discarded an eyesore from their family's perfect portrait, preserving both Anastasia and the family's reputation and future. They believed then that sacrificing one wayward, disobedient eldest daughter in exchange for the entire family's security and prosperity was worthwhile. But this didn't last long. Anastasia was indeed intelligent, perfectly inheriting their natural gifts, even surpassing them. However, this intelligence was mixed with excessive calculation and wariness. Perhaps seeing my fate of being abandoned when deemed useless, Anastasia began guarding against them from the start. She feared that someday they would discard her as they had discarded me. This wariness created an invisible barrier between parents and daughter that should have been intimately close. "Initially, we thought we weren't showing her enough love," Charlotte said with vacant eyes. "We gave her more, better things, but she seemed impossible to tame." That intelligence was used to extract maximum benefit from her parents while ensuring she wouldn't follow in my footsteps. The second year, their relationship grew increasingly tense. Anastasia was far from being like me in my younger days, capable of foolishly devoted attachment and filial piety toward parents. She was clever, but utterly ruthless. After marrying into the vice minister's household, she focused entirely on her husband's family, treating her birth parents as tools to be used for leverage and advantage. She used our connections, but guarded against our involvement in her affairs. Edmund sighed. She and her husband, Lord Sebastian, were cut from the same cloth, serving the court while scheming for maximum personal gain. They began feeling uneasy, watching Anastasia and her in-laws navigate the edges of power with increasingly bold methods, fearing they would bring disaster upon themselves. The third year, disaster indeed struck. Anastasia's in-laws became entangled in court intrigue. A corruption case was exposed with irrefutable evidence and far-reaching implications. This time, there were no convenient scapegoats like Alexander and me for them to sacrifice without hesitation. To protect Anastasia, the aging Edmund and Charlotte were forced to drag their ailing bodies, abandon the dignity and reputation they had always treasured, and grovel for favors everywhere. They spent their lifetimes accumulated relationships and wealth filling this bottomless pit. A lifetime of integrity, all destroyed. Edmund closed his eyes, his face etched with profound pain. Ultimately, their official positions were demoted repeatedly until they were exiled to this remote small city far from the capital. Anastasia also fell from grace within her husband's family, scorned by all. Her former reputation as a talented woman completely vanished. Even at this point, Anastasia, she still wouldn't give up. Charlotte's tone carried a hint of disgust. She claimed she had ways to return to the capital, demanding we continue helping her, using our last connections, raising funds. We're old, truly unable to struggle anymore. We've seen through it all and don't want to be involved in such machinations anymore. Edmund continued, his voice full of desolation. But she wouldn't let us go. She said we were her final trump card. How could she possibly allow us to stop and enjoy our twilight years? Vivian, tell me, isn't this retribution? At this point, they would suddenly seem to awaken, abruptly stopping their words with regretful and panicked expressions. Charlotte would hastily add, why burden you with such matters? They're all troublesome affairs that will only upset you needlessly. Edmund would immediately adopt that forced lightness, trying to steer the conversation back to warmth. Let's not discuss such things. Vivian, look, though your parents aren't as prosperous as before, we can still care for you properly. Leave the heavy work in the shop to us. At our age, we have no other desires except having our children nearby, living peacefully. They would look at me with hopeful eyes, awaiting my response, even a slight nod, a vague of acknowledgement. But I gave them nothing. I simply listened quietly, as if hearing a story that had nothing to do with me. When hearing of their former relief, my heart remained unmoved. When learning of Anastasia's obsession and their desolate later years, I felt no satisfaction whatsoever. Those intense loves and hatreds seemed to have truly settled deep in my heart with time, forming thick scabs that no longer stirred easily. They rambled on while I would rise to extinguish excess candles and count materials for the next day, using actions to silently announce the conversation's end. They watched my silent, distant figure, their eyes growing dim. That carefully maintained facade of warmth crumbled inch by inch under my wordless resistance. Knowing they were in the wrong and understanding that past hurts couldn't be erased by a few words of repentance and several days of help, they ultimately dared not push me too far. Well, Vivian, rest early. Charlotte would stand, her voice carrying barely perceptible emotion. We'll come again tomorrow. Edmund would also rise, his tone filled with reluctance and dissatisfaction. I still wouldn't turn around, merely offering a distant acknowledgement. Listening to their slow footsteps fade beyond the door, I would walk forward to carefully bar the shop entrance. Like every previous night, I would check that the fire was completely extinguished and arrange ingredients for the following day. Then, blowing out the final lamp, I would climb the narrow stairs to the loft. As darkness enveloped everything, my heart remained like that closed shop door, quiet, stable, unmoved. Whether their repentance was genuine or performative self-pity, their displays of affection could not touch me. The next day, shortly after the shop opened, an unexpected visitor arrived. It was Anastasia. Her hair was somewhat disheveled, and her once lively eyes were now bloodshot, staring at me with venomous intensity. "Vivian, why won't you just die?" Her shrill voice shattered the shop's tranquility, startling several customers who hadn't yet left. "Why did you have to come back? Haunting our parents like some vengeful spirit? Why won't you just rot and die somewhere?" She approached step by step, her face twisted with hatred, completely lacking any trace of a refined woman's composure. "It's all your fault. Ever since you appeared, our parents have had eyes only for you. They spend every day running to this broken shop, treating you, a convict, like treasure. I am their daughter. I am the family's only hope." I set down my account book and slowly raised my head, looking calmly at her hysterical state. Strangely, I felt no anger, only the detachment one might feel watching a clown's performance. 5 years seemed to have truly separated me from those intense emotions of the past. "My shop doesn't welcome you," I said quietly but clearly. This seemed to further enrage her. She raised her hand as if to strike me, but just then, Edmund and Charlotte entered carrying freshly purchased ingredients. Seeing this scene, Edmund's face darkened instantly. He strode forward and forcefully grabbed Anastasia's raised wrist. "Anastasia, how dare you!" Edmund shouted angrily. Anastasia stumbled from his grip. Seeing Edmund and Charlotte, her grievance and fury intensified. "Father, mother, you're still protecting her. This convict who brought such shame to our family. Slap!" A sharp sound rang out. Not from Edmund, but Charlotte. She stood before Anastasia, her hand still trembling slightly, but her eyes filled with heartbreak. "Hold your tongue. Vivian is your sister. Look at yourself now, like a madwoman." Anastasia covered her face, staring at Charlotte in disbelief, then at Edmund's iron expression. The madness in her eyes gradually gave way to cold resentment. She violently shook off Edmund's hand, her gaze sweeping across all three of us with an eerie smile playing at her lips. "Fine, very fine. So now you're a reunited family, aren't you? Treating me like an outsider, aren't you? You'll regret this." She flung these threatening words and rushed from the shop. But Anastasia didn't give up. For the following days, she appeared daily near the shop, crying and making scenes, spreading slanderous gossip about our family everywhere. Small cities hold no secrets. Soon, rumors about our family were flying thick and fast, becoming the most popular topic of street corner gossip. Edmund and Charlotte tried to stop this, but achieved little. They seemed to age years overnight, their brows perpetually clouded with worry and guilt when they came to help at the shop. I continued silently making my pastries, facing customers' curious, sympathetic, or scornful glances. Compared to my imprisonment years ago and losing Alexander, this gossip seemed insignificant. The turmoil escalated under Anastasia's manipulation until half a month later, when a fast horse from the capital brought news that would change everything forever. That day, Anastasia practically snatched the letter from the messenger's hands, her face alight with wild joy and anticipation. "It must be Sebastian! He knows I'm suffering here. He's come to take me back to the capital." She eagerly tore open the wax seal, her eyes greedily scanning the letter's contents. However, her smile instantly froze, transforming into utter terror and deathly pallor. The letter slipped from her trembling hands as she collapsed like a deflated balloon, emitting an inhuman wail. "No, impossible. How could this be?" Edmund and Charlotte picked up the letter. One glance sent them both staggering backward, faces drained of color. This wasn't a lifeline, but a death sentence. The letter was a desperate final message from a former student who had risked everything to send it. It revealed that during this period, to force her husband's family to take her back, Anastasia had secretly manipulated events, leaking scattered information about the family's corruption and factional activities. She had intended to use this as leverage, threatening total mutual destruction if they didn't retrieve her. Instead, political enemies followed these clues and uncovered years of their criminal activities. Account books, letters, witnesses, the evidence was overwhelming. The emperor was furious and issued an edict, execution of the entire family. Because they had severed ties with me 5 years earlier, I wasn't implicated in this case. On execution day, the sky was ominously overcast. I went to the execution ground, standing at a distance. Around me, crowded, whispering masses. In the prison cart, Anastasia had lost all trace of her former arrogance. Her hair was matted, her prison garb filthy. She struggled desperately, screaming at the equally bound Edmund and Charlotte. "Father! Mother! Save me! I don't want to die! Think of something to save me!" Edmund and Charlotte were ashen-faced. Edmund looked at the mad Anastasia with overwhelming regret and despair, croaking, "Evil creature! Fool! The family! The family is destroyed by your hands. Your mother and I were truly bewitched back then. Such regret." Charlotte wept uncontrollably. Under the executioner's shoves, she struggled to turn back, searching the crowd until her gaze found me. That look was indescribably complex. Guilt, pain, reluctance, finally dissolving into muddy tears. Using her last strength, she faced my direction and silently mouthed 3 words: "Sor, Rai." I stood there quietly, separated by the crowd, watching them. My heart held neither satisfaction of revenge nor sorrow at witnessing blood relatives face death, only an almost ethereal calm. As if watching a play that had nothing to do with me, the actors in the drama cried, struggled, repented, while I remained a detached observer. The blade fell, and all clamor returned to deathly silence. The crowd gradually dispersed, carrying sighs and commentary. I turned and left that blood-scented ground. Instead of returning to the shop, I went directly to the mountain outside the city, to Alexander's grave. Mountain wind persisted, pine and cypress stood silent. I brushed some dust from the headstone and gently placed down a dish of fresh lotus cakes. "Alex," I began softly, my voice particularly clear and peaceful in the mountain valley. "Did you see? Those who framed you and took your life, they've received their just deserts." No response came, only wind rustling through leaves like his gentle sigh. "You told me not to think of revenge, to live well. I listened to you." I paused, my fingertips lightly tracing the deeply carved name on the stone, that cold touch somehow bringing me strange warmth and strength. "Now all grudges are settled. I will live well, Alex, just as you hoped, peacefully, steadily, carrying your portion too, living on together." Sunset's glow pierced the clouds, spilling over the headstone and washing over me with gentle warmth. I stood there for a long time until darkness approached, then turned and began walking steadily down the familiar mountain path toward that small shop glowing with warm light below. Behind me, the green mountains stood silent, as if nothing had ever happened. Ahead lay the path belonging to myself, a long, peaceful remainder of life. Looking back now, I realized that what I thought would be the end was merely another beginning. The months following the executions passed quietly, my small pastry shop settling into a rhythm that felt both familiar and strangely hollow. Without Edmund and Charlotte's daily visits, the shop seemed larger somehow, their absence creating spaces that I hadn't noticed when they filled them. The regular customers noticed too, of course. Old Mrs. Chen, who came every Wednesday for her grandson's favorite almond cookies, asked tentatively one morning, "Your parents haven't been around lately, dear. Are they well?" I simply told her they had returned to their hometown, which wasn't entirely untrue. They had indeed gone to their final resting place. She nodded sympathetically and didn't press further, but I caught the knowing look in her eyes. In small towns, news travels faster than the wind, and whispers about the executions had undoubtedly reached every household. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it an unexpected visitor. I was arranging fresh osmanthus flowers in the window display when a young woman entered, her travel-worn clothes suggesting she had come from far away. She couldn't have been more than 20, with intelligent eyes that reminded me painfully of someone I'd rather forget. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but determined. "I'm looking for Miss Vivian. I was told I might find her here." I set down the flowers and studied her face more carefully. There was something familiar about the set of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders. "I am Vivian. How may I help you?" "My name is Eleanor," she said, stepping closer. I believe you were once married to my uncle, Alexander." The world seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, memories rushing back like a flood. Alexander had mentioned having family in distant provinces, but I had never met any of them. "Your uncle," I repeated slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He wrote to my father, his brother, about you, about how happy you made him, how he planned to build a life with you. When we heard about his death..." She paused, swallowing hard. "We tried to find you, but you had disappeared. It took us years to trace your whereabouts." I felt something crack inside my chest, that carefully constructed wall of detachment developing its first fissure in years. "Why did you come?" I asked, though I wasn't certain I wanted to hear the answer. Eleanor reached into her worn traveling bag and withdrew a small wooden box, placing it gently on the counter between us. "Uncle Alexander left this for you. Father kept it all these years, hoping someday we'd find you to give it to you properly." My hands trembled as I opened the box. Inside, nestled in faded silk, was a delicate jade hairpin, the very one Alexander had shown me weeks before our ill-fated wedding, explaining how it had belonged to his mother. Beneath it lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "He wrote that letter the night before your wedding," Eleanor said quietly. "Said it was for you to read if anything ever happened to him." I unfolded the paper with infinite care, Alexander's familiar handwriting swimming before my tear-blurred eyes. "My dearest Vivian, if you are reading this, then my greatest fear has come to pass, and I am no longer beside you. Know that every moment we shared was the greatest blessing of my life. You brought light to my dark world, warmth to my cold existence. If fate has separated us, do not let grief consume you. Live, my beloved, live fully and freely, for both of us." The letter continued, but I could no longer see the words clearly. Eleanor's gentle hand on my shoulder brought me back to the present. "There's more," she said softly. "Uncle Alexander had been saving money, planning for your future together. He left instructions that if anything happened to him, those savings should come to you. Father has been keeping it safe all these years." "I don't want money," I said quickly, my voice hoarse with emotion. "I can't take anything from your family. Alexander was all I ever wanted or needed." Eleanor's expression grew both understanding and stubborn. "Aunt Vivian, may I call you that? My uncle specifically said you might refuse. He told Father to tell you that accepting his final gift isn't taking from us, but allowing him to continue caring for you even in death. How could we honor his memory if we don't honor his last wishes?" The afternoon that followed was one of the strangest of my life. Eleanor insisted on staying to help in the shop, her capable hands quickly learning the rhythm of serving customers and arranging displays. As we worked side by side, she told me stories about Alexander's childhood, painting pictures of a boy who even then had possessed the gentle strength I had loved so deeply. He was always bringing home strays, she laughed, carefully dusting flour from her apron. Birds with broken wings, orphaned kittens, children who were being bullied by the older boys. Father used to joke that Alexander would give away his last copper to someone in need. That sounds like him, I murmured, remembering how he had shared his meager meals with me during those secret courtship days, always insisting I take the larger portion. As evening approached, Eleanor showed no signs of leaving. "Where are you staying?" I asked, realizing I had been so overwhelmed by her arrival that I hadn't considered practical matters. "I had hoped." She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders in a gesture achingly reminiscent of her uncle. "I had hoped you might allow me to stay here for a while. I have nowhere else to go, and I'd like to know you better, to understand what made my uncle so happy." That night, I made a bed for Eleanor in the small storage room behind the shop. She insisted it was perfectly comfortable, though I suspected she was merely being polite. As I lay in my own narrow bed above the shop, I listened to her quiet breathing below and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the presence of family, however unexpected its form. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's presence transformed my carefully ordered existence in ways both subtle and profound. She possessed her uncle's gentle nature, but combined it with a sharp intelligence and surprising business acumen. Within a month, she had reorganized my inventory system, suggested new pastry varieties that proved immediately popular, and somehow doubled my daily profits. "How do you know so much about commerce?" I asked one evening as we tallied the day's unusually impressive receipts. Eleanor smiled, a slightly mischievous expression that made her look even younger. "Father runs several grain mills in our province. He insisted all his children, daughters included, learn every aspect of business. Money doesn't care if you're male or female, he always said, but stupidity will bankrupt anyone regardless of gender." Her presence also brought unexpected challenges. Customers began assuming she was my daughter, and I found myself fielding questions about her parentage with increasingly creative deflections. More troubling were the young men who began frequenting the shop, clearly more interested in Eleanor's bright smile than my pastries. "They're going to drive away my real customers," I grumbled one afternoon after the blacksmith's son had spent a full hour pretending to consider which type of cake to purchase. Eleanor laughed, a sound like silver bells that filled the shop with warmth. "Poor Thomas. He's sweet, but has no more sense than a goose. Yesterday he asked if I might teach him to bake, since he's always been fascinated by the culinary arts. I doubt he can distinguish flour from sawdust." "You're encouraging them," I accused, though without real irritation. "Perhaps a little," she admitted with an unrepentant grin. "It's harmless, and their coin spends as well as anyone else's." But it wasn't entirely harmless, as I discovered when Eleanor failed to return from her evening walk one night. I had sent her to deliver a special order to the magistrate's wife, a journey that should have taken no more than 2 hours. When midnight came and went with no sign of her, I felt a familiar panic rising in my chest, the same crushing fear I had experienced that terrible night when Alexander never came home. I was preparing to search the streets myself when Eleanor finally appeared, her dress torn and her hair disheveled, supported by 2 of the town guards. "She's unharmed, miss," one of them assured me quickly, seeing my expression. "But there was some trouble with the magistrate's nephew and his friends. They'd been drinking and thought they misjudged the young lady's character." Eleanor's cheeks were flushed with anger rather than fear. Misjudged indeed. The wine-addled fool thought I was some tavern wench available for his amusement. He learned otherwise quickly enough. As the guards departed with expressions of barely concealed amusement, I examined Eleanor's torn sleeve and the scratch on her cheek. "What exactly did you do to him?" "Nothing he didn't deserve," she said primly, "though I suspect he'll think twice before accosting unaccompanied women in the future. Uncle Alexander taught me a few useful skills before he died." Despite her brave words, I noticed her hands trembling as she attempted to repair her dress. The incident had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, and it had certainly shaken me. The thought of losing Eleanor, of returning to my previous solitary existence, filled me with an unexpected terror. "You can't walk alone after dark anymore," I said firmly. "It's not safe." "I can take care of myself," Eleanor protested. "I know you can, but humor an old woman's fears." Eleanor studied my face carefully, then nodded. "Very well, but you must promise me something in return." "What?" "Stop calling yourself old. You're barely past 30, Aunt Vivian. Uncle Alexander wouldn't want you to think of your life as over." That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. Eleanor began treating me less like a fragile widow to be handled carefully, and more like the family she clearly considered me to be. She started asking direct questions about my life with Alexander, about the trial, about the years of imprisonment I rarely discussed. "Father told me Uncle Alexander confessed to crimes he didn't commit," she said one evening as we prepared the next day's dough. "He said Alexander believed it was the only way to protect you." "It didn't protect me," I said bitterly. "I was still imprisoned, still lost everything." "But you survived," Eleanor pointed out gently. "Uncle Alexander knew you were strong enough to endure whatever came. He trusted you to live, to build something new. Look around you, Aunt Vivian. This shop, this life you've created, the way the whole town respects you. He would be so proud." Her words stirred something long dormant in my heart. For the first time in years, I began to consider the possibility that mere survival might not be enough, that perhaps Alexander had indeed expected more from me than simple endurance. This realization coincided with Eleanor's announcement that she had received word from home. Her father was ill and needed her to return to help manage the family businesses. The news struck me like a physical blow, though I tried to hide my distress. "When will you leave?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Within the month," Eleanor replied, her own voice carefully neutral. "Father's condition is serious, and my brothers are, well, they're better at growing grain than selling it." We spent the remainder of that evening in companionable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As I watched Eleanor's graceful movements as she kneaded tomorrow's bread, I realized how much she had come to mean to me. In just a few short months, she had become the daughter I had never had, the family I thought I'd lost forever. The night before her departure, Eleanor presented me with an unexpected proposal. "Come with me," she said simply. "Father would welcome you gladly, and the mills could use someone with your organizational skills. You could have a real home again, Aunt Vivian. A real family." The offer was tempting beyond measure. Eleanor's presence had awakened longings I thought permanently buried, for companionship, for belonging, for the simple joy of caring for someone who cared for me in return, but something held me back. "This is my home now," I said finally. "Alexander is buried in these hills. His memory lives in this place. I can't abandon that." Eleanor nodded, though I could see disappointment in her eyes. "I understand, but promise me you won't abandon yourself to grief again when I'm gone. Uncle Alexander wouldn't want you to become a hermit for his sake." As her carriage pulled away the next morning, Eleanor leaning out the window to wave until she disappeared from sight, I felt the familiar ache of loss. But this time, something was different. Eleanor had left me with more than memories. She had given me a glimpse of who I might become if I chose to truly live rather than merely exist. That evening, alone in my shop for the first time in months, I climbed to Alexander's grave as darkness fell. The jade hairpin Eleanor had brought gleamed softly in the moonlight as I placed it beside his headstone. "She's gone, Alex," I whispered. "Your niece. She's wonderful, strong and bright and kind, just like you. She made me remember what it feels like to have family." The mountain wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine. In that gentle sound, I imagined I could hear Alexander's voice, encouraging me to embrace the future rather than cling to the past. "I think," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "it's time I stopped merely surviving and started truly living. For both of us." As I walked back down the mountain, the lights of the town twinkling below me like earthbound stars, I began making plans. Eleanor had planted seeds of possibility in my carefully ordered existence, and I was finally ready to tend them and watch them grow. The next morning, I began crafting a letter, the first I had written in years. It was addressed to Eleanor, accepting her standing invitation to visit when I was ready. Not permanently, not yet, but as a first tentative step toward the larger world that lay beyond my small shop and smaller life. Alexander had given me the strength to endure. Eleanor had given me the courage to hope. Now it remained for me to give myself permission to truly live again. That's our story for today. We hope you enjoyed this incredible tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Subscribe for more captivating stories like this, and don't forget to like and share this video. Thank you for being here with us. See you next time.